Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. I call to order the virtual informal meeting of the 2021 session of the Economic and Social Council Forum on Financing for Development follow-up. Today, we will convene two panels. Panel 1 is on accelerating infrastructure investments for a sustainable and resilient recovery and restoring trade. As you all know, to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and net zero carbon emissions by 2050 will require a global transformation in infrastructure, energy, transportation, housing, communications, as well as the industrial and agricultural production models of all countries. It is estimated that between $100 to $120 trillion will need to be invested over the next 30 years in sustainable infrastructure if we are to reach the target of zero emissions by 2050. Of the current annual funding gap of $2.5 trillion in infrastructure, 2/3 of the gap is in developing countries, where infrastructure investments declined by $50 billion last year. 83% of the current investment in infrastructure is publicly funded, according to World Bank figures. The vast majority of developing countries do not have the public resources to finance infrastructure investments, nor the capacity to borrow at the low interest rates available to the advanced economies. It is evident that due to the scale of the investment needed in sustainable infrastructure, both the advanced economies and especially the developing countries will have to find ways to access private money to succeed in making the transition to sustainable infrastructure models. Significant private capital is available in global markets. It is estimated that private wealth is now $399 trillion, of which $50 trillion is held by retirement and pension funds. There is considerable desire on the part of private capital to invest in infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure projects. But at the same time, there has been a historic reluctance on the part of the private sector to invest in infrastructure projects which are long-term with lumpy upfront payments and uncertain returns. Realizing the untapped potential of the private sector to invest in infrastructure development will require a range of measures, including building more conducive, enabling environments, and expanding the pipeline of bankable projects, especially in the developing countries. The global community needs to support efforts to mobilize public and private investment through specific actions. I believe that the United Nations can play a key role in accelerating private investments for sustainable infrastructure, including by facilitating greater coordination between governments, donors, development finance institutions, and the private sector on policy issues, as well as the development of a pipeline of bankable projects. I have therefore proposed the establishment of a sustainable infrastructure investment facility under the auspices of the United Nations to act as a facilitator in promoting sustainable infrastructure investments. One mechanism which already exists under the United Nations rubric is the SDG Investment Fair, where governments present specific projects and concrete investment opportunities to the investor community. I would suggest that this could be turned into a standing forum that is convened virtually round the year to bring together investors and governments with bankable projects. The fair can serve as an umbrella platform to bring together all other platforms for a coordinated and coherent approach. This should include both the UN and non-UN platforms, the private sector, and other stakeholders. It is a pleasure to convene this panel today, and I would now like to first of all invite the Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Liu Zhenmin, to present the 2021 Financing for Sustainable Development Report. Mr. Under-Secretary General, you have the floor.